back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos. And today we're going to be making a fit and flare dress with a low back. And I actually wore this dress to my engagement party that recently passed. Now, the rhinestones that were added to this dress are completely optional. I am going to show you guys how I did that in case you want to do it though, because I do think they're gorgeous and that they add a lot. This is more of a more intermediate to advanced project, but there are ways that you can make it a little bit easier, like using a fabric that's not quite as challenging as satin, like maybe using a cotton fabric. I can totally see you guys dressing up or dressing down this pattern. If you wanted to make it more casual, then totally use something like a cotton or a linen or crepe fabric, and then you can wear it more as an everyday dress. But if you want it to be more of like a wedding, elopement, engagement party dress like me, then use some satin fabric and add some rhinestones. And you guys know I like to reward those of you who are subscribed with the notification bells turned on. So if you're watching this video early and you want to purchase the pattern, then you can use the code ENGAGEMENT to get 30% off this dress pattern until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. But all of the information on this pattern is going to be listed in the listing description of the pattern, which is the first link down below. That link also has all the supplies and materials that you're gonna need for this project as well, so make sure you check it out. And as always, I'm going to be linking all of the equipment I use in this video in the description below. So if you want to learn how to create this dress, then just keep watching. So first we need to print out our pattern, and before you print, make sure you read the warning on the first page of your pattern. Basically, it's just letting you know that you should read your instruction pamphlet before printing if you want to conserve paper. Make sure you print out at 100% scale, and then just line up all of your pieces of paper next to each other without overlapping and match them up at the lettered diamonds. Then just tape everything together, and I really like to use cardstock and packing tape to make sure that my patterns are going to last a really long time. After you've taped everything together, then decide what size you want to create by referring to your instruction pamphlet and then cutting on the corresponding line. For this pattern, you really just need to worry about your bust and waist measurement and not really so much your hip measurement. For reference, I'm cutting out a US size 0. Now just follow the labels on all of your pattern pieces to cut out your shell and your lining fabric. And once you've cut everything out, we can finally start sewing. We're going to start with the bodice first. So grab your center front piece and your two side front pieces, and we're going to sew those together at the princess seams. So I'm just pinning everything up so that it's a little bit easier for me to sew. When you're working with satin, it definitely makes things easier if you pin really well. And I'm just going to pin up both of those pieces, and then I'm going to sew it on my sewing machine. Then after I sew it, I'm going to trim down my seam allowances to about 1/4 of an inch, so just in half, and then I'm going to give it a really good press on my iron. And I'm going to press the seam open. And then we're going to move on to the bust area. So grab your upper bust and lower bust and place them right sides together and sew. A little trick I like to do to make sure everything's lined up perfectly is to mark out the center of those pieces and then match those pins up. Then I can pin it perfectly so that I'm able to sew it really well. Sewing this seam will be slightly challenging, especially if you've never sewn reverse curves before. Reverse curves have different lengths of raw edges, so it might be kind of hard to match up, but the length of the stitch line will be the same. So really what you need to do is take your time with pinning before bringing it over to your sewing machine. Going slow and steady for reverse curves is the key to success. After I sew, I'm again going to trim that seam allowance and then give it a good press. Now to connect the bust to the bodice, and this next step is definitely the most challenging part of the dress, so just know that if you get past this step, it should be smooth sailing from here on out. So I'm going to pin these two pieces together, again using my trick of finding the center first and then matching those up before pinning. This again is a reverse curve, and you can see how intense of a reverse curve this is. It's not something that's easily going to be pinned up and sewn. So a little trick I like to do to make my life easier when pinning and sewing is to make little clips on the bodice where that reverse curve is. So right here, along this curve, I'm going to make clips into the seam allowance. I'm going to do about 1/4 inch clips. You don't want to do too deep of a clip because you don't want to go over your stitching line. But this just helps to open up the piece so that you can pin it easier without it puckering and sew it easier. This is super challenging around these curves, so make sure you take it nice and slow. Slow and steady is absolutely the key here. If it's too challenging to go around that curve for you, then I would also recommend sewing it by hand. But if you've done it right, it should look clean and beautiful just like this. Now time to attach the front and back bodices together. So I'm just going to place them right sides together, and I'm going to pin and sew along the left side seam, and then I'm going to serge and press. And then I'm going to repeat all of those sewing steps for the bodice that I did on the shell for the lining. Only difference is I'm going to sew the side seam at the right side seam instead of the left side seam. And then just serge the bottom edge to prep it for later. Now we're going to move on to the skirt. So this is the back skirt piece right here. I'm going to place the front skirt piece right on top of that. The front skirt piece is wider, the back skirt piece is longer, so that can help you differentiate them. And then I'm going to pin, sew, serge, and press along the left side seam. Now time to move on to gathering the skirt. So we're going to sew 2 rows of basting stitches inside the seam allowance of the waistline of the skirt. Make sure you sew 2 rows of long basting stitches so that it gathers really nice and evenly. Now we're going to take the skirt and place it right sides together to the bodice at the waistline seam, and I'm going to pin it right at that left side seam. Then I'm going to grab the bobbin threads from the basting stitch of the skirt, and I'm just going to pull those to create a little gather for the skirt. I'm going to gather enough so that it can fit into that waistline, but I'm also going to make sure that it's gathered really evenly. Once I get it to my desired length, I'm just going to tie off those bobbin threads so it doesn't move around while I'm trying to sew. Then I'm going to pin it, then sew it, and then finally serge it. Now we're going to repeat that gathering process for the second tier of the skirt. So first I'm going to sew and serge along the side seam, then I'm going to sew the 2 rows of basting stitches in the seam allowance. I'm going to pull on the bobbin threads to create the gather so it fits evenly into the first tier of the skirt, then I'm going to pin, sew, serge, and press. Next up, we're going to insert an invisible zipper into the right side seam, and I've shown you guys so many different tips and tricks for how to insert an invisible zipper. I will link another video above and down below on how I do it, but I'm going to give you a new method that I've been loving lately. So the first thing I do is sew one of the sides of the zippers down using a basting stitch, and I'm not worrying about sewing it super close to the zipper teeth. I'm just getting it on there so I can figure out the placement of the other side of the zipper. Now when the first side is on there, I'm going to close up the zipper, and I'm going to grab a pin and mark where the waistline is on the other side of the zipper so that when I unzip this and I flip this zipper piece over to the other side seam, I can line up this pin with the waistline of the other side, so that way I know when you close the zipper later on, the waistline is going to line up perfectly. Then I'm also going to use another basting stitch on this side so that I can zip up the zipper to make sure everything is lined up perfectly before I go ahead and sew it for real. So after you check to make sure that everything is nice and lined up, then you can go ahead and sew your invisible zipper using a zipper foot close to the zipper teeth or with an invisible zipper foot. And here is our finished zipper, you guys. Perfection. Last step for the side seam is just to close up the side seam with 1/2 inch seam allowance from the zipper where the zipper ends to the hem. And then this is optional, but you can add a hook and eye closure on top of your zipper if you would like. Now we're going to make the straps. So fold together your straps right side together in half along the long edge and pin along that long edge and then sew along that long edge. Then we're going to trim that seam down. I am personally going to be using pinking shears to do this. I love using pinking shears to trim down my straps. And then I'm going to be using a loop turner to flip both of those straps right side out. And then of course, don't forget to press your straps when you're done. Now that we have the straps, we're going to pin them at the dress. So I'm going to place the strap at the front and I'm just gonna secure it with one pin. I'm going to do the same thing from the other side. And then I'm going to move the strap and also pin it at the back as well. Make sure when you pin it at the back that the strap is nice and straight. It's not flipped or twisted or anything like that. Now it's time to attach the lining to the shell. So place the lining to the shell right sides together with the straps sandwiched in between. And I'm going to pin all along the neckline and down the side seam where the zipper is. Now I'm going to sew the neckline and the side seam where the zipper is. Where the zipper is, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but when I get back to the neckline, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew the entire neckline. Make sure you're taking this nice and slow because this is going to be a focal point of the dress, so you want to make sure it's really clean. After you do that, you can just flip everything right side out. Now it's time to understitch the neckline. So to understitch the neckline, you want to have the lining of the dress on your right, you want to have the body of the dress on your left, and the seam allowance underneath pointed towards the lining on the right. Now you're going to sew through the lining and catch the seam allowance underneath about 1/8 of an inch away from that neckline seam. What this is going to do is make sure that the lining does not come out and roll out of the neckline to be seen while you're wearing the garment. Now it's time to hem our dress, and I've included a 1/2 inch hem allowance. So I'm going to fold up the hem a 1/4 inch twice and then stitch it down. This hem should be super easy to sew because it's not on a curve, it's just a straight hem, so it should be easy. Now finally, I'm going to be adding some rhinestones to my dress. This of course is absolutely optional, but you can add it if you want some more pizzazz. This was very time consuming, so be patient if you do decide to do this. So to attach the rhinestones, I'm just going to take thread that matches my dress, and I'm going to do about 3 or 4 stitches between every single rhinestone gem. This is just going to secure it down, and I'm also going to tie off my thread about every 6 or 7 rhinestones, just so in case a thread ever breaks, the entire rhinestone piece will not come off your dress. And then lastly, I'm just going to tack down the lining. So right now the lining is loose along the waistline, so you can still kind of see into the wrong side of the fabric, which we don't like. So I'm just going to take a needle and thread and smooth out the lining. And then I'm just going to tack it down in a few places to keep it secure. You could definitely use your machine for this and just stitch in the ditch along the waistline, but I really prefer to use a needle and thread and do hand sewing for this just to have a little bit of a softer finish. And now your lining should be secure. But I'm going to tack it down a couple spots at the front, at the side, and then a little bit along the center back. And then after that, you are done. Alright guys, so that is how you create this dress. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and I hope it helped you out. Question of the day, let me know how you would envision creating this dress. What fabric would you use? What occasion would you use? Would you add rhinestones? What would you add to it? And again, if you're thinking about purchasing this pattern, make sure you get on that because the code is only going to be active until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. Now, if you like this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up because it's the easiest way to support your favorite creator for free. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonollo. Don't forget to check out the pattern below. It's the first link down below. All of the supplies and materials you need are also in that link, and all of the equipment I use in this video are in this video description. Anyways, I think that is everything, so thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!